This is for the folks I've been abusing with the word Freigeld and interest and inflation-free money. It is reading of a portion of Chapter 5 from the Money Syndrome, where I got infected by these very strange ideas about money. The reason I'm doing this reading is because when I first read this, nosed around a bit in Google, trying to find other references to this period and to the monetary system. I could never find it. My suspicion is it's all in the German language sphere and more narrowly in the German historical academic sphere. So way outside little old me's reach. The monetary system itself has a number of properties, as described by Helmut Kreutz, which I think are quite remarkable. Whether or not they have any application for today is a separate issue. But perhaps some or all of you would be very curious about a system that did not require interest in order to drive economic vibrancy, economic activity, which by all accounts was enormously prosperous. It was not plagued with a recession, and the moneylenders didn't end up with all the bling bling. So, for better or worse, I'm doing this reading, and I'm actually really curious what people with real economic training would make of this shit, because Helmut Kreutz was an analyst, a financial analyst, so he was not a dummy. And like I've mentioned before, some of the things he says in his book, first written in the 90s, is, at least from my sense, in before Piketty. And he was saying things that at least post GFC sounds a lot like prescience. That might be a bias from reading it, maybe around 2011 after it was translated into English. But yeah, that's why I really would like to see more people read it, mostly because I would really love to see what better educated people would say in response to its contents. This is from the chapter Interest in the Past and Present from the Money Syndrome Towards a Market Economy Free of Crisis by Helmut Kreutz. Helmut Kreutz, born in 1923, he did pass away in October of 2017, was an experienced financial practitioner and analyst, and had presented his analytical findings about money matters in uncountable publications, lectures, and seminars. In 1990, he was appointed for a teaching position at the University of Kassel and proposed for the Alternative Nobel Prize by many friends. Das Geld Syndrome, or the Money Syndrome, was first published in Germany in 1993. It went through 5 revisions, last released in 2001. It was translated into English in 2010. From Chapter 5, Interest in the Past and at Present, subsection on page 105. Have there ever been periods without interest? It is not known if, at any time in history, interest was totally irrelevant. But there must have been times, however, when interest rates were low and had corresponding positive outcomes. It is said that the Spartan statesman Lycurg outlawed gold and silver and introduced money made from iron. Perhaps he did this to free money creation from the precious metals. However, the impact of money on the markets changed with this iron money. The iron money was no longer superior to the goods for which they were exchanged, like gold and silver. Those who accumulated money, thus pulling it out of circulation and creating a shortage, risked losses similar to the owner of goods. In an extreme situation, he would find a heap of rust after a few years. The times of economical and cultural prosperity during the times of the Stauffer family were very well known and documented. Quote, a gift of the monetary system is what Hans Weitkamp called it in the subtitle of his book, The Middle Ages. During these times of high Gothic period, money which was not durable was brought into existence, namely the so-called single-minted bracteate. This money was made from thin silver sheet metal that had a very low metal value and a short storage life. The important quality of the bracteate was that they were recalled once or twice a year. That means they were declared invalid by public announcement. They had to be exchanged for newly minted coins without exception. 3 new ones for every 4 old coins. The demonetization, along with a compulsory exchange of currency and a reduction in value, was known in earlier times for normal coins. This took place mainly during the inauguration of a new ruler, during which the coinage was released with a new image imprinted on it. The Archbishop of Magdeburg, who was the first to mint these bracteaten in the year 1154, turned this demonetization of money from the exception to the rule, most probably to finance the state's budget in a secure and convenient manner through the collection of the exchange reduction, called the coinage tax. It is unsurprising that this method of tax collection soon found imitators among other rulers and mint authorities, but this reduction, probably hardly welcomed by the citizens, had an unanticipated and beneficial side effect. In contrast to the heavy coins, the thin sheet metal money was constantly circulating in the financial cycle. Hardly anyone took them out of circulation or even collected them in chests. As with each collection, one ran the risk of higher losses than at the money exchange. In order to avoid these, or at least to minimize them, the money was put back into the cycle as soon as received. If one did not have any need for the money and thus had money in surplus, one readily lent it out to others. In this manner, one could pass the buck of money reduction to others. The borrower bore the risk of loss, and the lender was entitled to the refund of the full amount long after the date of exchange. What was the effect of the bracteates? The consequence of these features of the bracteates was an extensive and uninterrupted money circulation. This, in turn, led to a reversal of the short supply of money with a corresponding decrease of interest rates. The corresponding effects on social and economic events were also positive. Indeed, the solid and durable money existed alongside the bracteates, but they were more likely kept as treasure. In the times of the bracteates, mainly the 13th and the 14th century, hundreds of towns were founded in the German-speaking world. The Hanseatic cities flourished, the economy grew, and for the first time there existed something akin to a vast wealth of the bourgeois. Traces of these times can be seen in the preserved cities or old city areas such as those of Dinkelsbühl, Rothenburg, Nordlingen, or Lübeck. There had never been so many artists and craftsmen active in these centuries. Almost every beam on every building and every last stone at the top of the churches and cathedrals were artistically decorated, as were the glass windows and the church pews. Especially the cathedrals bore evidence of the wealth and prosperity of these times. They were not constructed using forced labor. as were the pyramids, but by highly paid craftsmen and master architects. The widespread affluence was not the consequence of an increasing productivity and economic growth as we understand it today, but the result only of a long economic period with steady money circulation. It was a period of increased prosperity achieved by avoiding the impoverishing effects of recessions. It was the result of a proper system of money circulation without any exploitation. In many places at these times, people were working 5 days a week. The Blue Monday, for example, was a holiday in the German guilds. The name was derived from the fact that the craftsmen had their blue work clothes washed on this day of the week. Even today, Blaumachen in German hints at evading work for a free day. During the Middle Ages, there were no vacations as we know them today. There were, in addition to the weekends, up to 70 or more holidays in the course of a year, as reported in the chronicles of those times. How affluent these times must have been is reflected in the impressive architecture of buildings that still exist. When the construction of the work of the dome in Cologne began in the middle of the 13th century, there were scarcely 20,000 people living in the town. And these people were in a position to plan and execute a building project that could accommodate practically all the citizens. At the same time, they were able to protect the city with walls and gates, the solidity and construction of which are admired even today. Such huge construction works could be performed even when their completion extended over more than 100 years, something that could not have been financed or realized in interest-dependent times. Time was obviously not yet identical with money in those days. The end of the era during the 14th and 15th century confirmed the fact that these times of economic and cultural prosperity were connected to the money system. At the end of this historical period, the bracteaten were replaced by the stout pennies or the eternal pennies. The abolishment of the bracteaten might have been due to the fact that the mint authorities recalled them too often, which stirred resistance among the citizens. Or maybe new gold and silver reserves had been discovered, which provided sufficient material for the production of solid double-minted coins. In the beginning, the coins that were minted that way stimulated trade and industry, but they quickly vanished from circulation into treasure chests. With this possible re-emergence of shortages in the supply of money, the interest system inevitably began to be revived. Moneylenders such as the Fugger family or the Wessler family in Germany became richer and richer. All the others, such as the archbishops and sovereigns, even the Emperor of Vienna, became poor as debtors. Cathedrals that were not finished in construction remained that way for hundreds of years. The towers of the cathedrals of Ulm and Cologne were finished only in the 19th century, and one of the two spires of the Cathedral of Strasbourg is still missing today. In historical sources, this sudden termination of construction work is often explained by a lack of money. Where the money was and why it disappeared has never been explained. Since the people living in those times were at a loss with their understanding of the positive effects of the bracteaten and the negative effects of the solid coinage, they must have certainly welcomed the reintroduction of coins made from gold or silver, which were never subject to demonetization. They were, unfortunately, also not subject to any pressure to be put into the market, just like goods to be exchanged. After reading this, I realized I must have read something about bracteates somewhere else, because I recall reading that the merchants were the ones who lobbied to go back to a permanent coin. In short, the bracteate system was a very early example of a modern monetary theory, if you will. In a nod to Mosler, the state compels the citizenry to hand over all their coinage. The state destroys that coinage completely. As a tax, it has some very interesting properties for those of lower income who spend everything they earn. They don't face a tax, do they? Sounds rather progressive to me. Savers, aka money hoarders, take a haircut. Their ability to accumulate wealth meets with a damping coefficient, a rather strong one. Conversely, the state can issue as much currency as they see fit. Of course, within reason, they are obligated to at least print 75 cents on the spondulate, but everything above that, it can be used for their own needs and the purposes of the community at large for economic activity to benefit the community. Let's all hope so. Bracteates are a monetary system that does not need to grow. It can happy well find a set point according to the population. That population is not restricted in their economic activity by the virtue of the state culling wealth or money hoarding. I mean, you probably end up throwing this into a predator-prey equation and seeing how it sets out over time. I'm not certain how one models this because my brain does not operate in that way right now. I just don't have all the equations uploaded. But in a world where we're faced with constraints put on us by old Mother Nature, and these are existential constraints, we as a species might be facing a very real test of our fitness for survival. And we bloody well better find out or figure out how to adapt lest we die.